Aloha everybody, my name is Dennis Mathewson and welcome to Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm the owner of Cosmic Airbrush. I've been in the airbrush and custom painting business since about 1974, and I've watched our industry grow by leaps and bounds lately into new techniques and new paints and fun new things to do. This time I've tried to take my home hobby, which is I carve tikis and do some other wood carvings, into my motorcycle painting industry. So what I've done here is carved out some things like skulls and dragon heads and tiki heads, and I've found a fun way to apply them to fuel tanks and fenders and made this a really easy thing that anyone can do. So join along with me here for the next few minutes as I run you through some step-bys on how to actually simply apply these things and run some quick airbrush color around them and come up with a real successful look that's different, fun, and exciting for other people to see. Okay, the first thing I'd like to discuss is the way that we actually cast these molds and the products that we're using to do it. Most of the carving I do over here in Hawaii, I'm using really rare koa woods and exotic woods, but in this case, for durability, I'm going to use this two-part casting resin, which is mixes 1-to-1 in a plastic mixing cup, and it kicks so fast and so hard as within 60 seconds, as fast as I can pour it out of the cup, this thing is rock hard. And this one here is only cured overnight, and I can't even tear it up. It's a great beginning for a carving if I want to go right from here. Let's say I wanted to place this right onto a fuel tank or another surface. What I do is I would affix this with a two-part epoxy, and once it's locked in on there, I would begin by actually drawing out my design and begin by dremeling out the original. All of these items that I have here on the table, these dragons, these skulls, have all actually been originally done on fuel tanks and fenders. And what I've done is, while I did each piece, I casted a mold off of them out of latex. And then later I went back and mixed this two-part casting resin and made different forms from them. Occasionally I'll give them different pitches and different depths, so that sometimes when I get the different depth out of it, I can get different ideas to create backgrounds. This one, I gave it a little bit slight of a bend so that it'll actually fit the contours of different fuel tanks and different fenders. Some items might be too large, so I'll trim them down and make them where they adjust to it. They might bend a little. You can use a little bit of a heat gun to give it a little bit more pitch. Another good trick is to grind out the backs on them so you get them just right where they seat well. So it's important to know what your measurements are and which designs work best for you. I used some UFC 19 on top of my black base, and from that point now it's ready to apply my carving techniques to it. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to Scotch-Brite this tank. It's been Scotch-Brited already, but I'm going to use the Scotch-Brite pad to create a nice scuffed surface to create adhesion for my next step. After I've Scotch-Brited it, I'm going to take this House of Color post-sanding cleaner and I'm going to apply it to a clean rag, and I'm next going to wipe this surface down clean. It's real important that you know that you use this waterborne type of cleaner, that you remove it all with a clean rag. It also removes static and other contaminants, but if you don't use a clean rag, you're just moving around the dirt and leaving it there. At this point, I'm ready to take a piece of my casting material, so I'm going to start working down here on the tank. Now this is one of the pre-forms that I've made. As you can see, I just leaned it out of the cup, but it gives me a good beginning point to work for my carving. Normally I'll select a nice piece of koa wood or mango wood, and then I'll try to lay something out on that, the same type of technique. Now first I'm just going to tape this down to get a good idea where I want to place it on the tank. I think working right up here on the top of the tank, I kind of consider that the sweet spot. At this point, my piece is applied to the surface of the tank I'm going to be working on. I'm going to actually do some registration on how I want it to draw out. In this case, I'm going to try to give myself some light line work so I can see how it's going to feel on the fuel tank. Normally on a piece of wood it's more square or something like that, but in this case I can kind of pre-plan the lean on this plastic to be just where I might want it. So once I get some nice light line work done, I'm ready to remove it back off the fuel tank and then begin to carve it. Next step is I'll just take this off and I'm ready to start carving away. Okay, this is great. This is the best part to me. Once I get into the actual carving of the surface of this plastic, now that my registration's all been done, I'm ready to pretty much go right at it. Now what I'm working with here is this Dremel tool. And most of these Dremel tools you can pick up pretty much at any decent hardware store. This is the smallest one of the tools that I actually work with here in Hawaii. Some of my larger Foreman tools I use on my big tikis can really move a lot of wood. But in this case I want to get down to fine detail because I don't have a lot of surface to work with. Now this is an adjustable head on the end of this cable for this Dremel. Allows me to work around the surface without having to hold the machine right in my hand. So what I'm going to do is change these tips from time to time as I work through the head of this skull right here. And as you can see, I have some of the different heads that I'm working with right here. For example, some of the rafts, they're a little bit more coarse, and they're better for things like cleanup or making smooth gouges into it. Some of these file type Dremel heads are more for cutting and actually create ledges and cutaways and straight lines. And some of the more detailed ones will actually be more like a drawing type of tool, where I could actually write a signature or get right down to dental work right in the teeth. The final tools I'll work with will be these sanding wheels, which will actually clean up the skull when it's all finished and make it ready to go right into a primer stage. So first thing I'm going to do is turn on my Dremel. I get my Dremel turned up to just about a medium speed, and then I'm going to actually start tearing right into this thing. Oh, this is great. Woo-hoo. As you can see, this is quite a mess. So now's a good time to talk about health and safety now that I've created a mountain of Hawaiian snow, because this is about all we get over here. So remember to protect your eyes. Wear eye protection, protect your lungs, and wear a respirator or some type of good dust mask. In this case, I'm wearing light glasses because I'm doing small carving. But if I was doing something larger, I might need more. Gloves are a real good idea too if you're doing heavy carving. These blades can get pretty sharp. If one spins off, it'll take a fingernail or a chunk of finger right out of you. After about a couple hours, I would probably finish this piece. At this point, it's pretty rough, but it kind of gives you the general idea how the Dremel will cut through by using the different tips I'd change. I get into fine details. The next thing I would use would be my small carving knives I have here that I got in Japan that are quite detailed to get right into dental work and things like that. The total time it would probably take me to carve this complete piece, maybe 3 or 4 hours. So to save time on this video, what I'm going to do is I'll pull the one over here that I already have finished so that it gives you a better idea of how the end results would be when I was done with the carving. I've shot a coat of primer sealer over this to allow us to see the image better. Actually, right here, my final result on this skull was that I left this one portion of the eye socket wide open here, which gives it a gap, which will make it look like it's more sunk into the surface of the tank. Gives it a little bit of character. The next part of what we're going to do right now is after our carving's all finished, is we're going to go back and clean our tank again. I'm going to use the House of Color post-sanding cleaner one more time. And again, I'm going to use one cloth to put it on. Get it good and clean because I've been moving around on this surface a lot with my hands. And now I'm ready to apply my transfer paper. I'm going to gently lay it over the top of the surface and work my way from the center out. It's going to buckle a little bit, and that's okay because the contour of the tank, we're going to allow for it. This transfer paper, you can purchase it at most sign supply shops or at a good quality airbrush store. The next move we're going to be making here is we're going to apply the skull back to the surface of the transfer tape. And the good thing about the transfer tape, it helps me keep that surface clean while I'm working now. Now I might use a ruler to maybe measure out where my center points are on here, but for the sake of time, I can pretty much judge just by eyeball where the middle of this tank is. And my next move is going to be that I'm actually going to trace my sculpture. Pretty simple stuff. Next, I'm going to take an X-Acto knife here and I'm just going to cut out the tracing that I just made. Even though this type of cutting isn't so artistic on the edge of the surface as a lot of stencil cutting is, it's still critical to make sure that you're using fresh blades at all times when working with X-Acto knives. Now I remove my cutaway to create my window where I'm going to apply my skull. Well, we have artwork already. But the reason I'm doing this right now is I'm trying to create adhesion so I can put my epoxy down. Now this tank that I'm working on right now is a fiberglass tank. So I'm actually working right through a painted surface. So I'm using this roll-lock die grinder type of spinner. It kind of creates some tooth to put my epoxy on. But if I was working on a raw metal tank, I could actually adhere right to the primer or right to the ground metal. And then I would try to rough it up a bit with some 80 grit dry sandpaper, and then I would adhere my skull or my artwork right on that raw metal surface. Now we're going to apply our skull. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mix this SEM quick epoxy. It kicks really quick, so pay close attention how I do this. This is a two-step process. First I'm going to squirt it out of the tube real quick, then I'm going to mix it real fast. After that's done, I'm going to apply it to the back of this skull and place it right inside my window. So here we go. I want to make sure that I mix enough of it so that I don't run short. I use a popsicle stick here real quick, and then a piece of junk cardboard to kind of gather it up and move it right over the back of my skull. I make sure that I cover all the sides of it so that I get a nice good bond to the tank. Next I'm going to bring it right up here on the surface and move it right into the center of my window and apply some pressure. Now this stuff kicks really fast, so I'm just going to kind of hang on to it here while it goes off. Okay, so right now you can see that the epoxies come all the way around and kind of floated inside my eye sockets. And that's okay with me. I actually like it in there, kind of gives a good float. This epoxy stuff on your hands can get real nasty, so I recommend that you wear gloves. So what I'm using right here is a Devilibus dry wet cleaner that works great. Takes it right off, scrubs it right away. So at home, take precautions and clean up when you're done. Make sure you don't use any type of lacquer thinner or reducer when you're cleaning up, because that stuff can soak right into your skin and get right into your bloodstream and do some serious damage. So make sure you use products that are safer. For example, these Devilibus scrubs. This is a great product to have around in your shop and do your cleanup with. Our next step is going to be applying a metal glaze product like a Bondo type of material around the circumference of the skull here. So what I'm going to use is this product right here, this Evercoat, and I'm going to mix a small quantity, about the size of a golf ball. And then I'm going to add the hardener to it next, about maybe ½ an inch of it. Now I'm going to mix that together real quick. I know I get good mixing right now when I get a good color change on it. So what I do is I'll use a little piece of cardboard to spread it nice and even. Now you notice I have a glove on at this point because I'm actually going to apply this with my finger. And I'm going to come right around over here and I'm going to mix it and set it right in between that gap. You notice that I did a little bit of additional cutting to my mask so that I keep my exterior around the skull clean and I can get my filler material in tight around it. Try to be careful and not get the filler material up on your sculpture too much. A little bit's okay because it'll actually help it to freeform to the rest of the tank. This process may take a couple passes, but my first pass we're going to go on kind of generously. Now the next trick of what I want to do is I'm going to take this popsicle stick and I'm going to kind of go right along the edge of my sculpture to make sure I get my filler in there real tight. Even though I've made one pass around the skull and I have a few gaps here and there, once my filler starts to kick, I'm pretty much done with that first pass. So at this point, what I want to do is I want to remove my mask around the skull of my transfer paper so that I'll be able to get in a little tighter on my next one. And by masking it this way, as you see, I don't create a lot of mess all over the tank. My next step I'm going to do here is I'm going to take a straight edge razor blade and I'm going to take off, while this filler is still soft, I'm going to take off some of my high spots that I don't feel like I could live with later. If you work with this product in under 3 minutes, it actually cuts off really easy. I am mixing a second batch to fill in all the places that I might have missed the first time. Okay, I'm actually going to apply this material as close off the paper right into that eyeball socket as I can, and I'm just going to take my finger and kind of move it around in there. Go right in with the other one with a little access, and I'm going to add just a little bit more material in there, fill my gaps. A little bit of light cleanup, and Use my finger to spread it around the best I can. Make sure I get all my air bubbles out. Leaving a little bit of texture is okay because we're talking sculpture here, we're not talking finish. And I need a little bit of something to sand. And at this point we're ready to go to sanding as soon as that kicks. Where we're going to go from here is we're going to go back to the Dremel tool, and I put a little sanding spur on the end of it here, a little barrel sander. And I'm going to sand around the perimeter and outside edges of the filler and the sculpture to smooth it out. So I'm going to put my mask back on and we're going to go at it. I call this my rough cut. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to come back in with some freehand sandpaper like 80 grit and kind of smooth out my transitions, and then I'll go back with that barrel one more time. Sometimes I like to take my sandpaper and actually roll it up. Gives me a little bit better of a sanding turn to get inside that space between the form and the tank. Talking sculpture here, so I like to get a little bit more creative right into the surface of this paint. Now if this was a raw metal tank, I wouldn't be able to do this step, but sometimes I'll put a skim coat of Bondo down first before I apply the skull to give me a little bit of area to kind of carve into around the skull so it has more of a transition into the surface of the tank. So as you see here, I'm going to put my mask back on, give it one more pass with this barrel. The last sanding step is going to be this piece of 220 I'm going to go with, which is just going to do some cleanup and smooth things out. And this will be my final sanding. I like making the sandpaper bend in a lot of different ways so that it works right into my corners and edges real well. I like leaving a little bit of the lumps of the body filler here and there because it creates a little bit of style to the design. I mean, we could go all the way and sand out every little imperfection, but you know, what human skull doesn't have imperfections? You get real creative, you know, you could like drill a bullet hole into the center of it and who knows go where with it. But for this case, I've laid down some groundwork with some of these gouges into the surface of this fiberglass, because later I'm going to add some water effects to it to make it look like this skull is submerged underwater. Okay, we're going to clean this up, blow it off, and we're going to go to primer. Next, we're going to apply primer to the skull. I'm going to carefully mix my primer components together. This is a 4-to-1 mix, and you need to be very careful to make sure that your measurements are exact, because if you don't mix it exact, you're not going to get the results that you want. I'm mixing my primer using 4 parts of the House of Color KD 2000 with 1 part KDA 2000 catalyst and 1 part RU 311 medium reducer. I'm now going to apply a light coat of primer on first and allow that to tack for a few minutes. I'll follow in about 5 to 10 minutes with a good heavy wet coat to fill in any small crevices and seal the artwork down on the tank. After 2 good wet coats, the primer will be allowed to dry for a few hours. When you're spraying any kind of catalyzed system that contains any kind of hardener, it's important that you remember a few safety features. One being, use a charcoal filter respirator. This will save your lungs. They even make some bigger stuff that'll save everything else you got. Sometimes these small respirators are only good for light airbrush work on base coat, but when you incorporate a catalyst into your colors, you want to make sure that you wear the proper safety equipment: gloves, eye protection, and a good air respirator. Also, when you're cleaning up and you get paint on your hands, make sure you use these made for paint removal type of cleaners. These work much better than things like lacquer thinner, soap and water, because soap and water isn't going to get anywhere, and lacquer thinner eventually could kill you. So pay proper attention to these kind of safety features. Next, I'm going to add a guide coat technique over this dry primer by spraying some black shimmering right over the primer, creating a film of a black mist that allows me to be able to see any imperfections under the black mist as I sand it. Now I'm ready to start beginning sanding. I've soaked this sandpaper in this water for about an hour to make it more pliable. I'm going to use this 400 grit sandpaper to begin wet sanding the surface of my primer. The guide coat will allow me to see any high or low spots that I may need to focus on. You can see how the gray comes right through. I'm going to give it a little elbow grease here. This stuff sands really easy and really quick. All I want to do is blend the primer out into my black base so I don't have any kind of transition or any orange peel that shows up. I'll continuously dip my sandpaper to keep it clean and my surface good and wet. I don't really need to use any rubber blocks or anything like that because I'm working around such a three-dimensional object. It only handicapped me here. Kind of curl up my sandpaper here to get into tight corners. I don't want to really completely sand away all of my grooves and cuts and gouges because that's actually part of my artwork. This is really a dimensional piece of artwork more than it is a painting, so I don't want to remove any of the work that I feel needs to be exposed. You know what's really great about this House of Color primer is I don't really need to sand all of it. It'll give me good adhesion for my next colors I'm going to follow with without having to even scuff it or sand it. So where I do like to sand it, I can. But where I can't get into it in some of these deeper areas, I can pretty much just let it go at that once I clean it. I think right now I'm pretty much ready to just clean up and get ready to paint this thing. Once I've completed all of my sanding, I'm going to follow up and wipe this thing down one more time with my KC20 cleaner. This is my post-sanding cleaner. I want to make sure that I've got all my wet sanding slop off this thing. So I give it a good wipe down with a wet cloth, and then again I follow up with a dry cloth to make sure that I've got it all off of there. Once my wipe down's complete, I'm going to blow this thing off and make sure there's no dust or anything in the crevices. I'm just going to use my airbrush here to make sure that happens. In your shop you might have an air blower or something a little bit more industrial that's a little bit more pressure, and that's okay too. Most of the time when I work on these sculptures, I'll actually be working on a primered surface throughout the tank. But for speed reasons on this video, we're going to use this black base to start on, and you can start on a color also. You don't have to necessarily start on a raw metal or a raw primer surface, but it's optional. You can go any way you want. After I've blown it off here, make sure the whole surface is dry and clean of dust. I'm going to go ahead and start trying to bring my black back into my design here and kind of frame it back in. I'm using black shimmering base coat mixed with RU311 medium reducer, and this is an Iwata HP TR1 airbrush. Kind of a mini spray gun and has a little trigger built into it here. It's kind of unique. It has really nice line control right along with the same traditional trigger of a spray gun. I really don't want to completely lose that light color around the skull because I'm actually going to airbrush other colors into it. We just want to make sure our transition between the black and the primer is an airbrush color and not just a hard line. Okay, at this point I got pretty much a nice blend and transition between my artwork and my tank. The next color I'm going to introduce to my artwork here is some base coat white, and I'm just going to try to bring some life back to this skull, which is now in a primer zone, back into white. Some of my white, because this is a dimensional project, is going to travel off of this skull and right back onto my base coat black that surrounds it. And that's okay, because it's the dimensionalism of it that actually makes this stuff so cool. But right now I just want to kind of get a nice base to work off of. I try to keep my airbrush pretty close to my surface and move my paint wet on wet as I whirl through so I don't create a lot of dry spray on my deep crevices. If I get a lot of dry spray in there, it's going to look kind of fuzzy. And here's the trick, is I'm actually going to start to paint as if the subject was a little bit wider than it truly is. As you can see here, I'm gone back to my black base coat and I'm filling in and chiseling away at my eye sockets and my nose crevices, trying to give them a little bit of definition and character. I'm running about 25 psi on my airbrush. I don't want my air pressure too high because I don't want it to blast all over. I want my paint to pretty much lay down on my surface and stay wet so I don't create that dry spray. This is the fun part when we begin to airbrush. What's great about this part right here is, you know, after airbrushing for 30 years, t-shirts and cars and everything, now that we're getting into this 3D stuff, I get excited again just to see something new happening in my industry. Bring a little bit of detail into these areas that need some attention. I'm just laying down some groundwork for my water techniques here. I'm going to make this guy look like he's submerged. I'm going to add a little bit of pearlescent to him to make him kind of pop off there dimensionally. Pearl is a great thing for dimensional round subjects. Right now I'm going to spray a little bit of some SG100 Intercoat Clear mixed with some red to green chameleon pearl in it, which is going to give me a little bit of shift and pop in the sun on this thing, and some special effects to the skull. The pearl will actually make this thing really come to 3D and make it come off the surface. The chameleon will add it to a custom level that people will ask this guy what the heck color that thing is. I'm not afraid to load this thing up with this stuff either. You might try to use some other pearls too, like platinum or silver, alabaster, even blue or red or anything else. But some of the cool new stuff out there today, if you don't try it, you never know what your effects are going to be. New is cool. Okay, that's looking good right now. You see we got a little bit of shift happening in that thing. You see how everything kind of pops right out of there. And I'm really happy with it so far. What I'm doing now is I'm using a little bit of House of Color True Blue Shimmer and Pearl to create kind of a rippling water effect around my image. I'm going to make him look like he's sunk in the water. There's a lot of things we could do here, like make him in fire, make him in a cloud, put him in color, even incorporate a graphic. But for this one, we're going to put him in water. Bring that water line right up to the edge. You see my gouges I have in there now are starting to maybe make a little sense to my artwork here. I'm eventually going to grow this out to be a little bit lighter in color, but I'm just laying down my groundwork. It may be subtle, but it'll be effective later. We're going to do layers. The next color I'm going to introduce is a opaque teal color or a turquoise color. This is going to be a layering technique, kind of give me my water reflections kind of going. And I want to just do light wispy lines kind of growing together. It's kind of similar to the real fire technique, except it's not fire, it's water. I want to create a flow to my connections to all these lines. Seeing enough water in my day, believe me, to realize just what about it should look like. Periodically want to check my tip to make sure that everything's working right. I try to keep my paint wet on wet and move pretty quickly on the surface so I don't create any dry spray in these areas. Fade it right out into the black. I can still see my true blue pearl coming through in some of my darker zones. I kind of like that because it gives it that sense of depth. And with this trigger type of airbrush, pretty comfortable in the hand to do these kind of gesture movements without feeling like you're constantly pumping. And I'm just going to come back over to my other side and I'm going to balance all that out. About at this time I feel like I have enough of my groundwork for my teal down, and I just want to get it nice and centered and nice flow to it. You can still see my true blue pearl popping through here and there. I like that, and I'm going to mix up a cocktail color of this pearl and some teal and some white and add one more layer. here we go. I'm trying to blend all my colors together by blasting over all of this with my Candy Oriental Blue mixed into my SG100. And what that does is it transitions everything really nice right into the black. And all my little light wispies are now becoming part of this paint job. It's just making it look more and more deep. Keeping all this in a monochromatic tone with that blue is just really starting to look nice. My outside perimeters of my water, I'm going to try to get it a little darker than the center so that it blends real nice. And right up here, tight to the skull, try to create a dark line right down there where the chin might be, kind of simulating that that chin is sunken right under that water. And we're going to try to bring all this right into that black. Okay, I'm real happy with that result right there. I'm just going to come around to my other side and do the same thing. This candy is blending everything together real nice and taking my lights and my darks right into the black and making it a gradual transition where an opaque color or a pearl color is going to leave me more of a blunt end, but this one here pretty much just brings it into one nice blending tone. So a little bit of blue in these eye sockets at this time and in the nose just to give it a little bit of the value of the other colors that are around it. Pretty much done with that part of that candy. My next step I'm going to be doing here is putting a couple hot spots or wet spots on the surface of these highlighted areas with a little touch of white. I want to be real careful how much I put, not to overdo this step because it's really going to distract from the other flowing soft colors. Okay, again, I'm going in with my tight little white highlights here and there. Back to House of Color Shimmer and Base Coat White. And I'll keep my air pressure pretty low, about 22 psi, I'd say. At this point, you notice I've switched to my Eclipse, my CS, because I like it for the detail. It gives a really nice, crisp, fine line, which is what I need right up against the edge of this skull to give it the transition of the water right like it's curling up on it. Get a little bit of flow kind of rolling off the top of it. I got my airbrush kind of angled right at the sweet spot of the transition where it meets the tank so that my paint doesn't ride up on the skull too much or into the tank too much, and I gotta kind of roll around with it so my overspray doesn't show up in a place I don't want it. A couple nice highlight spots down here. You can see how all my layers start to come together. Here I'm just trying to highlight that chin area like it's just oozing out of the water. A couple little wet highlights coming off of it. Now this is the airbrush part of this whole piece that's going to make it come home, along with our light reflections and a little bit of that crisp white edge riding up on the side of that skull. We're just about done with our background. I think lastly we're going to add a little bit of a red eye in there to give it a little glow, a little bit of a evilness, so to speak. Right now I'm going to add a last coat of blue down here. This is a cobalt blue with some SG100 mixed in it, just to give a nice blend right into that black base so we don't hardly see a transition. We want it to just kind of melt right away. I'll do this to my other side, and then we're going to add the highlight in our eyes, and we're finished. Lastly here I got some apple red mixed in some SG100 that I'm going to go back in on my eyes and give them that evil glow. Kind of leave my centers kind of brighter than the outside. Kind of angle my airbrush in to give the sockets a little bit of that red glow. It gives us a hot element in this cool subject. Really, with our dimensionalism, really makes this thing look pretty wicked. And man, that's about it. I think I'm happy with it. Give it a cosmic signature and she's good to go. With some clear on this thing, maybe 2 sessions. I think I'd run some UFC 35 on it to kind of level it all out and sand it. And then I'd give it another good juicing with some UFC 19, flow it out and give it a good buffing, and it's a final product. We had a lot of fun finishing up that skull on that tank, but the possibilities of these sculptures on motorcycle parts and other things are endless. We could go with this tiki design I have right here that I've already applied back down to the epoxy and blending out of the filler around it. All it needs to be done is sanded and primed and gone right to paint. And right next to it you see one that I've already finished to that level. This tiki has already been melted in real nice, has a nice transition right into the black. And of course, you know, you can use other colors. You don't have to go on a black base. You could use white or work on candies and sink that thing in like a graphic. You know, there's other kinds of ideas like this one I have have this dragon head, and you can kind of embellish off of that with some scales and maybe put him underwater. Maybe have him coming out of a fire pit. That would be fun too. I'm going to do kind of a real quick through on this tiki, show you some real quick possibilities to work with instead of something so drawn out. Okay, great. First color I'm going to put on this tiki is I'm going to use some chrome yellow base coat. I'm just going to go really quickly here, right over, working with the grain that's inside the wood that I've carved into this tiki mask. I'm really just going to give it some pops and highlights and not really overdo these lines. I'm just going to kind of grow them right out, straight into my fender with some nice wispy little stroke lines. Kind of following the grain of the tiki. Remember, this design, I want to keep it kind of simple. Come back down here and follow the grain. And now remember, you got to kind of work your airbrush at angles around these sculptures, being that they're 3D. You got to work them from all degrees. Kind of grow these lines right straight up into here. And come around to my other side over here and just follow through with some more lines. And now, I'm going to go in right on my eyes and give them that nice little glow. As tikis know, the eyes can glow. There we go. Great, simple, real quick. I'm going to introduce another color to that. It'll be some Changelo Pearl. Being I'm working on this black base, I'm going to use some of this shimmering base coat pearl color, a little bit of some Tangelo. It's going to cause that 3D thing to really pop off there. You can see how the pearl really makes the thing come off the surface. I always like to give it a little bit more jump. And I've always been a real colorful kind of guy in this way. I like to make things pop. Even though it doesn't seem like much, these pearls, when I candy over them, the layers that they create are really going to make this thing jump. My next color I'm going to get over this is going to be some tangerine candy mixed in some SG100 to give it some depth. See, now I'm going to go at it with some my tangerine candy, and you can see how it's starting to melt everything together here real nice. It really brings that pearl up and drops in that yellow. Layering is really the key to these things. I got all kinds of ideas on these sculptures. If you need to get more info about them or want to know where to get them, you can contact me at my shop in Honolulu at Cosmic Airbrush. We're in the phone book, or you can even look us up on the web at cosmicairbrush.com. Or if you just need more info on how to do it yourself, call me personally, directly, right at my shop. I'm Dennis Mathewson. Remember that. I'll guide you through it. Really not that complicated. If you need sources of where to get some of these things or where to get the products to work with, we can help you out with that. Okay. Lastly, I'm going to come back with some apple red, a little bit of black, and a one little yellow dot in those eyes. And in Hawaii, we say we're pow. Okay, now it's time for me to come in with my apple red. Now remember, these candy colors that I'm working with right here are all the House of Color candy concentrates. Those are the KK numbers. And I'm mixing them in with my SG100 Intercoat Clear. It creates kind of a base coat candy system for me that I can work quickly with and it dries fast. So I'm not using the catalyzed ones. Otherwise I'd need to suit up and wait long periods of time for drying. So this stuff keeps me working real quick, and I get pretty much the same layering results I'd get out of real candy. Okay, I'm going to dial in on these eyes right here. Tiki Mon, here we go. Remember, this is dimensional, so you need to kind of get around on them. And a little bit of red blend out there. Let's just use up what we got in our gun here for good reason. Just makes it look deeper. A little bit in the mouth, a little bit under the eye and the brow. Tuck it in there, bring some depth. Okay, I think we're just about on the final run. Lastly, here on my colors of my background, I'm going to incorporate some black back into the existing black of the fender. This is again the base coat shimmering black. I love it because it dries so quick. It keeps me moving on the surface without having to wait long time periods, allowing it to dry. And you can over-reduce it to get a nice blend. See how that's just kind of stepping right in, and we're kind of melting it right into the background of the fender. Next, I'll come in and dial right into the details of the eyes and basically highlight the drops in it, give it more of a definition. Make that tiki look like it really drops right into that tank, or that fender in this case. Roll around the teeth, in through the gums, under the lip, and I'll sink a little shadow in the mouth just to create more depth. Work with some natural grain that's coming off that sculpture and blend it right in. Okay, that's pretty good, I think. Just kind of give it a last shot, get rid of all my overspray. Notice I'm keeping my paint real wet, really laying it down good and even. That way I don't get any dry spray. Great, last step is going to be the highlight in those eyes. The last thing I can see to do here is just going to put another yellow highlight in these eyes to give them a real deep, fiery kind of look to them. Like this thing has got some life in it. So I'm going to come back in with some of this chrome yellow right here. Just give them a little bit of glow. And man, that's it. Real sweet and simple, and she's pow, okay? From here, she's going to go to clear coat and get some buffing done after that, and it's ready to go. Well, as in Hawaii, we say we're all pow. I'd like to thank everyone for joining me, and I hope you got a lot out of this. With using the right equipment and the right products and following all the measurements and the right steps I go by, this tank sculpting and fender sculpting can really be profitable. So for now, we're going to say aloha, and I hope to catch you again.